Alright guys, here we go with part 3 of the Connerland WHAP review for 2013-14. If you're keeping up in the Crash Course book, we're on chapter 6 at this point. And we're going to begin to talk about trade networks. And the first thing we're going to look at are land networks. Now, land trade networks are determined by a few factors. Number one is the geography of the places we're dealing with. In other words, it determined what was traded, what products, where it was traded to and from, and also who was involved with the trade. So the first trade network or trade route we're going to look at is the Silk Roads. And for each of these as we go, it doesn't matter whether it's a land route or a sea route, you need to know a couple of things for each one. And number one is you need to be able to locate it on a map, figure out where in the world it's located. Number two, you need to know the major products and the major players or countries or empires, if you will, that conducted the trade along these routes. And number three, know the effects of what happened once these things were passed from one place to another. So, going back to the first one with the Silk Roads, it's the most extensive land-based trade route that we're going to study this year. And as we look at things, I'm going to divide it up into the spread of goods or trade products, the spread of ideas, the spread of technology, I think is the way I've got it. Yeah. Goods, ideas, technology, and in the case of this, we'll be looking at disease. So the first thing is the spread of goods, and you need to know more or less where they come from. So from East Asia or from China, you've got the most important one, which is what the trade route is named after, and that's silk, which was considered a luxury product back during this time. You've also got spices, which play a huge role in world history, particularly going forward. And you've got rice, tea, and porcelain. From South Asia or from India, you've got cotton and rice. Cotton is going to play a pretty big role in things that happen in India going on down the line. From Central Asia, you've got horses and camels, and these are things that are normally traded from pastoral nomads, so they get involved in this network as well. And then from the west, you've got amber and olive oil, or coming from a little bit closer to the Mediterranean, as you can see on the map. Next, you got the spread of technology along the Silk Road, and really the main one that comes about during this time period is the spread of farming techniques or irrigation in the form of the Connaught system, or Quanite system, which spreads, as we go forward along the Silk Road. Then you've got the spread of ideas, particularly Buddhism from India over to China. And we talked about in class some of the changes that happened because of this. It changes from the Theravada form of Buddhism, which is where Buddha is just considered a man, a prophet, a spreader of the message, to the Mahayana version when it gets to China, in which Buddha is depicted as a deity or as a god. And then you have the spread of disease, particularly pandemic diseases, or things that wipe out a lot of people. In particular, going forward, we'll be talking about the spread of the Black Death along the Silk Road routes. Next, we have the Sahara caravan routes, or for a lack of a better term, the sand roads. And they're located in the northern part of Africa, oddly enough and creatively named, along the Sahara Desert. As far as the spread of goods of this goes, you have basically north to south trade through the Sahara. From northern Africa, you've got dates, cotton, leather, and glass. From sub-Saharan or the southern part of the top part of Africa, I know it's crazy to say, but that's the way it goes. You have gold, salt, ivory, and slaves. Really, gold and salt are the two main products you need to associate with Saharan trade. As far as the spread of technology and transportation, you have the introduction of the camel, which makes this entire process possible because the camel is ideally suited for travel in a desert in the way that it's just biologically built. Next, you have the spread of ideas, and once again, kind of foreshadowing the next period, but Islam begins to spread through northern Africa through these trade routes, and particularly into West Africa as we move a little bit forward into the next period. Next, we've got sea networks. Now, the land routes, once again, you've got the Silk Road and the Saharan trade routes, okay? So we're flipping over to ways in which trade was conducted via boat, via ocean, seas, whatever it is. And the first and the most important is the Indian Ocean Trade Network. And as far as the spread of goods go, in this network, in this region, you've got silk coming from China, you've got cotton coming from India, and then rice, spices, porcelain, and people coming from whichever one they come from. As far as the spread of ideas go, you get the spread of religions, Buddhism and Islam. Okay, and you also need to be aware that this trade is able to be conducted simply because of monsoon winds, which are winds that happen basically twice a year. All right, so one set of monsoons will get you to Africa as a part of this network, and the other set of winds will get you back. And we'll talk about that and look at some maps on it in class. Also in the Indian Ocean Trade Network, you also have the spread of technology and transportation in the form of dhows, which are trading ships that make their way into this network. And it goes to a lot of technology that we talk about. It just makes things quicker and easier and a little bit safer. when it comes to navigation or shipping technology, I guess. And once again, just to re-say it, all this is helped by the monsoon winds that occur in the Indian Ocean network. Lastly, we have the Mediterranean network. The spread of goods on it consists of olives, pottery, and glass. And then the spread of ideas, the big one is Christianity. So be aware that the major religions of this time are spread through already existing trade routes. And that's a very important thing because the network for these things to disperse from one place to another and for these messages and for people to buy into this and for spread come from trade routes that are already there. So Christianity with the Mediterranean network, Buddhism with the Silk Road. Next, we move forward to trade in the Americas. Now, it's a little bit different from the places that we just talked about in the fact that you don't really have urban centers. There are a couple cities in Mesoamerica or in the Americas, but nowhere on the reach or the scale of the cities in the places that we've looked at. So you've got less people. That means that you have less opportunity and contact. So you don't have as many goods or a different variety or as much of a variety of goods as you do on these other trade routes. Also, these people never invented the wheel, so they're relying on pack animals or beasts of burdens to get their goods from one place to another. And it's a very inefficient, very difficult thing to do. So for that reason, you don't have the quantity or the volume of trade in the Americas that you see in other places. Also, the geography, because a lot of this trade is going from north to south, they have to overcome a lot of geographical hurdles to perform or to conduct trade that people on the Silk Road, in the Indian Ocean Network, or wherever it is, they just don't have to deal with. So all of those things it may equal more difficulty in conducting trade. But there were goods that were traded from one place to another. As far as the spread of goods, you got pottery, jewelry, and maize, which, as you know, is corn or an early version of corn. So you get that kind of moving north and south along the Western Hemisphere. And like the Silk Road, it's made in relay fashion. Remember, the Silk Road is not one main road. It's a series of way stations in which people do I don't know, incremental trade, I guess is the best way to call it, with a lot of middlemen. And we'll talk about how that affects things in class. But over in the Americas, it's done the same way. So it's from one village to another, and over time, these goods make it from their starting point to their ending point. All right, guys, we have made it out of the first two periods of the course. We're now at period 3, regional and trans-regional transactions from 600 CE to 1450 CE. First thing we're going to look at are some of the changes that come about from period 2 to period 3. And the first big one are changes in technology and trading practices. And the first factor that plays into this, through this technology changing and some adjustments in trading practices, is the fact that there's just simply more cities at this point. And a lot of these have popped up because of the trade that we previously talked about. So cities increase in size and importance, and there's just more of them around. Some examples that you need to know and be able to locate on a map are Jenne in Africa, Timbuktu, Gao. All of these are in Africa. Also Novgorod, which is in what is now Russia. Baghdad in modern-day Iraq. Samarkand in modern-day Central Asia. Bukhara in the same location, or in the same region. Dunhuang in Chang'an in China, or in East Asia as well. So be able to locate these things and also know that they do play a role in the changes, as slight as they are, the slight changes in trade that happened during this time. Now, I neglected to say in the last slide, but it's very important to be able to connect these cities with land routes, okay, and be able to differentiate between them and these important cities that arose along sea routes, okay. So the ones before on land routes like the Silk Road, so the Trans-Saharan Network, and things like that, and then these that are in the Indian Ocean Network, the Mediterranean, etc. And the examples you need to know for this, for sea routes, are Venice, which is in modern-day Italy, Constantinople, which is in modern-day Turkey, Tyre in the modern-day Middle East, and Zanzibar, which is in modern-day East Africa, Calicut, modern-day India, and then Malacca in the current Southeast Asia, Indonesia, or as we call them, the Spice Islands, and then Hangzhou, which is in China. Okay, so know where those are on the map as well. You'll have them, refer to them when you go through this. During period 3, we still have more or less the same things being traded along most of these routes. There are some new technologies and new products that come on board, but the one continuity, the one thing that is the same is silk along the Silk Road. Okay, now we do have some changes with inventions and new products that begin to be transferred along these routes, particularly gunpowder. All right, that's going to be very important going forward, obviously, but it comes on board during period 3. Also, paper, the compass, and the astrolabe, which become very important in period 4 once Europe decides they want to start exploring, and then we get into a whole different set of interactions between people when the world finally becomes, one place. It finally comes connected. Now, I will say this before we continue. The basic ways in which trade was performed and the people who did it was pretty much the same from period 2 to period 3. But in period 3, the biggest difference is, along with those new technologies in the last slide, is just simply how much stuff is getting traded. Like, this is on a scale that we haven't seen before. And part of the reason for that is because government policies during this time encourage the growth of trade. Number one, they begin to provide security and actively support trade. So for the first time, we have government involvement in trade, which obviously, if they're trying to get money, they're going to try to get more and more. So they're going to try to make it grow. And the way that they do that is to provide security and also through their governmental policies. More importantly, and this is a big thing, they don't interfere with the actual trade. Like, they're going to provide security, they're going to support it by doing what they can, but they're not going to get in the way of it. They're not going to mess with the interaction between the people who are trading the product. So by going hands off, by not getting involved, they, it could be inadvertently or on purpose, but they end up leading to or helping out the growth of trade in this period. Also, governments begin to print money, which makes the facilitation or makes the trade happen more easily because you have a common form of currency. And also building projects to facilitate trade, such as the Grand Canal, which we've already talked about in China. The next thing we got on our list is how the movement of people was caused and affected by environment, language, and religion. And basically, this is a cause and effect thing. The Vikings are the first group on the list, and they're probably the best example of how these things affected them and how they in turn affected the places where they ended up. Obviously, the Vikings from Scandinavia and from Northern Europe, you can see on the map here the routes that they took and the places that they went during their period of invasions. The environment played a big part in why they started doing these invasions at all, and it's simply because you can't grow a lot of crops in Scandinavia. So they're looking for food, they're looking for plunder, they're going out on adventure in some cases, but it's all precipitated or started by the fact that their environment was not suitable to be able to, to support their population. Now, as they move into places, particularly northern France and southern Europe or southern England, they begin to impact the places they are, and it's through the language and the fact that they influence language in this region to a pretty great extent. Next is Muslim Arabs, and the biggest thing that they did during this period was to go into Saharan Africa and introduce caravans, which made trade grow. All right, it just simply made it safer to travel. It allowed you to carry more goods, and it just made the whole process a little bit easier than it was before. And then obviously in seeing the Mongols, we'll talk about these in class, but we've been through this a lot. Genghis Khan, the fact that they were able to protect the Silk Road through the Pax Mongolica, in which people could pretty much walk with a bar of gold on their head from one side of the Silk Road to another and never get touched. And it was simply out of fear of the Mongols. People did not want to mess with them or get involved in things that they were in. So we'll go in these a little bit more in depthly in class, but for now, just be aware that all three of these groups fall under this category. Next are world religions and syncretism. Syncretism is a pretty big word in this course, and it means blending. Okay, it's how things change as they go from one place to another, and there's three pretty big examples of it in this period. And the first is what happens with Buddhism, particularly the Mahayana form that we already talked about, as it spreads from India to East Asia. Number two is with Christianity, in which they incorporated some Roman polytheistic beliefs into the basic teachings of Christianity to make it more palatable, to make it easier for people to convert over to it. In other words, it wasn't such a foreign concept once these things are blended in, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then lastly is Islam, the branch of Sufism that we dealt with in class in South Asia, the mystical element of Islam. And remember, the bottom line on this is things change. They become blended, so it's easier for the people that come in contact with it to accept these religions and to buy into the teachings and follow them. So blending makes it easier for people to adopt it. Last on the list is Bantu Migration, and this will wrap up part 3 of this because I'm about to run out of time, so forgive me if I talk fast. But the Bantu Migration happens in Africa, and there's two main components you need to know about it. One is the diffusion of ironworking, and two is the diffusion of language, of linguistic styles. And the reason that you might see this map at some point, so you need to be very aware of it, but the reason historians have focused on the Bantu migrations is because you can trace the origin point of a ethnic group or of a civilization from one place to another through different things. And in the case of the Bantus, it's very easy to trace the movements that they made, the migrations they did, through this ironworking, through the linguistic styles and all that. All right, that wraps up part 3 of this. We're going to keep on rolling 15 minutes at a time. See you next time.